Hey guys, Landon here with 515hosting.com, and welcome to another episode of Wallet Bakes, where we talk about all things WordPress, web design, web hosting, and search engine optimization, all the way from a pizza to bake. Today we're going to talk about things that are commonly sold in web hosting plans as upsells that you probably, at least in my opinion, don't need. Now, as someone that resells web hosting, that might seem counterintuitive if there's all that money to be made on these upsells, but when I got started in this business, I didn't just want to have a race to the bottom of pricing and approach clients with something that was more affordable. I also wanted to be able to show them why I was able to be more affordable and why I could deliver the same or greater value to them for a lower price. Like a lot of things in life, web hosting is one of those things where you get what you pay for, but that's only true if you're looking at things from an apples to apples comparison, to compare different types of servers and comparing different resources. Once you start factoring in all of these unnecessary upsells, that can drive the cost of a web hosting plan way up, and suddenly you're paying for things that aren't adding any value and you're not getting what you're paying for. One of the first things that we're going to talk about is just shared small business web hosting plans in general. So a lot of times what will happen is a certain web hosting plan will be called a small business plan. And I have a small business plan on my website. It's called that because it's sort of a catch-all of features that are valuable to small business owners, or makes sense for someone that has a small business. But I have clients that have small businesses that are using my basic plan, and I have clients with blogs that are using my small business plan, because what the plan includes is much more important than the name. But what you see at a lot of web hosting companies is they will title certain plans as small business plans in hopes that they can attract customers, small businesses, that have excess cash flow that they can just push the click buy now button on without much of a second thought, and significantly increase their margins without actually having to deliver any additional features to a client. Because here's an example. So you might have a web hosting plan that has one cron job, 40 gigabytes of mail storage, and one mailing list. And then they might offer another plan that's called a small business plan, and they'll say this plan is great for small businesses. And it might have 5 cron jobs, 100 gigabytes of email storage, and 50 mailing lists. And if you're a small business and you're looking at those and you say, okay, this plan is great for small businesses, I'll buy this one, but you don't use any of those additional resources, you're not getting any better value. A lot of times, small businesses are using WordPress websites with the basic WordPress cron, so they're not even using a single cron job. They're often using third-party email systems like G Suite, so they're not even using the email storage. And a lot of times they're using separate email marketing software like MailChimp, and they're not even using mailing lists. So unless you're actually going to use those features that a web hosting company is touting as commonly needed for small businesses, you're just overpaying for a small business plan. The next thing that I think is worthless to pay for is SSL certificates. Companies like GoDaddy, in their cheapest plans, don't even include free SSL certificates via Let's Encrypt. Now, Let's Encrypt is a plan or a software that allows you to generate free SSL certificates, and it's very common in almost all web hosting companies that use a web hosting dashboard like cPanel or Hepsha to offer a one-click SSL installer. A lot of times web hosting companies will offer that, but still turn around and try to do an upsell with an SSL certificate using some sort of fear mongering. But there's really only a certain number of cases, and those use cases would generally be cases that the people would know they need a paid SSL certificate. Otherwise, any company that has a form on their website or is using payment processing, the vast majority of cases can get away with an absolutely free SSL certificate using Let's Encrypt. And if you're not using a web hosting company that offers those, it's a good idea to look into one that does. Another thing that I feel is probably unnecessary is a dedicated IP address. So the idea of selling a dedicated IP address is that if you imagine a domain name as a family name, like the Smith family, and an IP address as the address of that family, then you start to understand that if there's a dedicated address of their house, then that address and that house has a reputation tied directly to the family. But if that family lives in an apartment complex, then their address is shared, and their reputation of other tenants on that address could affect the reputation of their family as well. The problem is that when people visit your website, they're not seeing every other website that's hosted on a shared IP address. You would have to manually make a point to go out and search for those using a reverse lookup. So as long as your website is able to display the website correctly, your browser doesn't really care whether it's a shared address or a dedicated address. And there's really only a few rare circumstances where malware or spam might be related to blacklisting that you could end up with a shared IP address causing issues. But for the vast majority of the time, if you're just using your website to display information, you're perfectly fine. Now, a dedicated IP address could be valuable if you're using your IP address for emailing, because some emailing systems might mark certain IP addresses as spam if they're associated with lots of spam. But a lot of web hosting companies aren't even using the web hosting server that your website is hosted on to also handle the SMTP relays. So in that case, you're really not getting any additional value out of paying for a dedicated IP address. There are probably a couple of scenarios where a dedicated IP address would be valuable. And again, it's going to be a situation where you're going to know you're going to need it. One of those is, for instance, if you have an external database at one server with a certain IP address, and you have your website files and folders located at another server with a certain IP address, and you want to control who can connect to the database server, then you start to have situations where a dedicated IP address becomes very valuable, because then you can say, I only want this IP address to connect to my server and refuse all other connections. Because if you're on a shared IP address and you say that you want to use that IP address so that your website can connect, then any other website using that shared IP address could try to connect also. And so you might not want that. And a dedicated IP address might be valuable in that scenario. But if you're not using that feature, then you're not getting any value. Another thing that's commonly upsold are just SEO features like auditing or sitemap generation tools. All of these SEO toolkits that get added on that allude to the fact that they're going to help you get ranked faster, or they're going to provide some sort of auditing to help you get your website ranked better. These things are only valuable if A, you actually use the information that they provide, if that information is even good information in the first place, and B, if there isn't another place that you can get that information for free or by paying for it to someone with even greater expertise. So let's say you're paying $5 a month for an SEO auditing kit at some web host, and maybe it comes with sitemaps. Well, sitemaps can be created using automated plugins within WordPress. Not to mention, it can be created using a variety of other tools online absolutely free. But even if it's offering auditing services to do things to your website that are recommended, if you're not applying those things, then it's worthless. And often, to apply those things, you're better off just spending that same amount of money per year on a local SEO specialist that can actually give you advice specifically to your website, and not just some sort of one-size-fits-all approach that a lot of these SEO scanners and tools provide. The last couple of things that I think are worthless are things like paid backup tools. So some web hosts will offer automated backups for an additional few bucks, but there's often tools available not only within the cPanel or HEPSHA that you can use to provide automated backups, especially if you install your website using Installatron or Softaculous or something like that. But also, if you're using a WordPress website, there's all types of different WordPress backup systems. So again, this is an area where it's sold as an upsell, but often the service is already integrated without even purchasing as an additional feature. It's just perhaps maybe a little more buried in the cPanel, or maybe not as intuitive to use as some of the paid features. And lastly would be emails. Some places will charge per email address, like $5 or something like that, to use a special email address system that's similar to like G Suite, or I believe Outlook has something now, Outlook 365, to handle emails. But in a lot of cases, you can just use the default email system built in directly to your web hosting account. You'll have SMTP access, you'll have an inbox, and a variety of different features available to you absolutely free and included with your web hosting plan. So paying for those features is really sort of redundant if you can get that for free. So that's pretty much all of the different things that I think are sort of unnecessary to pay for as an above and beyond feature set than what you get with a standard web hosting plan. And one of the things that I like about LiquidNet Ltd that I partner with for reselling plans to my clients for websites that I build, or for customers that are looking for web hosting locally, is that the sign up page is just like one page. It has different plans there. You choose a plan that fits your needs, and that's that. If you need additional things after the fact, you can upgrade within your web hosting plan server panel. But other than that, there's no crazy upsells and ridiculous add-ons like SEO or CDNs that you can do on your own much more affordably. And part of that is yes, getting educated about these things by watching videos like this. But the other part about it is just being a little more honest about how the business is approached. And if we're going to offer free emailing and free email addresses within the cPanel or within Hepsha, then we're not going to want to upsell that as something else, because that just doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem right. So anyways, if you have questions or comments about this video, I would love to hear it. If you're interested in hearing more videos like this, click the like button, and also be sure to check us out at 515hosting.com.